Yeah.
Right here.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of an adventure, though.
Yeah, of course it is. You had some snow boots?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good enough.
Yeah.
They do the trick.
Jai Spadikar Shishi Guru Gauranga Gandharvika Giridhari Shishi Radha Govinda Jiu Ki Jai Jai Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Sudarshan Chakra Jiu Ki Jai Shri Giriraj Govardhan Ki Jai Jai Shri Shri Nitai Gauranga Ki Jai Jai Shri Nrsimha Bhagavan Ki Jai Jai Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Jai Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Jai Srila Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada Ki Jai Srila Gaura Kishore Das Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Srila Sachidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur Ki Jai Vaishnav Sarvabhaum Shri Jagannath Das Babuji Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Gauri Vedanta Charya Baladev Vijabhushan Prabhu Ki Jai Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur Ki Jai Srila Narottam Srinivasyamananda Prabhu Trai Ki Jai Srila Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Das Raghunath Shada Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai Srila Swarup Damodar Roy Ramanandani Gaur Parshada Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sigaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Navadvip Dhama Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dhama Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopi Go Govardhan Dvadashavanatmaka Shri Braj Mandala Dhama Ki Jai Shyama Kunda Radha Kunda Yamuna Ganga Tulsi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Jai Shri Shri Radha Govinda Radha Gopinath Radha Madan Mohan Jiva Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda Radha Shyama Sundar Radha Raman Radha Damodar Jiva Ki Jai Shrimati Lalita Vishaka Adi Ashtasaki Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Rupa Manjari Rati Manjari Adi Manjari Vrinda Ki Jai Srimati Vrinda Devi Ki Jai Srimati Pauranamasi Yogamaya Devi Ki Jai Shri Gopi Swar Mahadeva Ki Jai Sarva Vishta Pradata Giriraj Govardhana Ki Jai Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Sudarshan Chakra Jiva Ki Jai Shri Jagannath Puri Kshetra Dham Ki Jai Bhakti Vigna Vinashana Shri Nrsimha Dev Ki Jai Bhakta Prabhara Shri Prahlad Maharaj Ki Jai Charodam Charu Sampradaya Charu Acharya Ki Jai Akaramat Raj Shri Chaitanya Mat Ki Jai Or Ananya Shakamat Samuha Ki Jai Shri Vishva Vaishnava Raj Sabha Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Tribhuvana Pavana Harinam Sankirtana Ki Jai Tribhuvana Mangala Harinama Prabhu Ki Jai Hare Krishna Maha Mantra Ki Jai Sachinandana Gaura Hari Ki Jai Shri Nityananda Mahajana Ki Jai Shri Panchatattva Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Langayate Girim Yat Kripa Tamaham Bande Shri Gurun Dinataranam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyeva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Mahabhajanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Gaura Tishe Nama. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vrindai Tulsi Devai Priyai Keshavasya Cha Krishna Bhakti Prade Devi Satyavachai Namo Namaha. Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Swarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakta Shaktikam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare. First of all, I'm offering my unlimited Dandavat Pranams and my Shraddha Pushpanjali at the lotus feet of my most worshipable, beloved Gurudev Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Sto Tarasata Sri Srila A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada. And then I'm offering my same unlimited Dandavat Pranams and Shraddha Pushpanjali at the lotus feet of my most worshipable, beloved Siksha Gurudev's Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Sri Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj and Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Sri Srila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. I'm praying at their lotus feet that they can bestow their causeless mercy on this fallen soul. And I'm offering my Dandavat Pranams to all of my Sri Sri Rupa Anuga Guru Varga, and I'm offering my Dandavat Pranams to all the Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis, past, present, and future. Hare Krishna. So we heard yesterday the famous verse from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, his instructions to Srila Raghunath Das Goswami. There are various verses quoted from different parts of Chaitanya Charitamrita, Mahaprabhu's instructions, but particularly from the Antya Lila 6th chapter. That two verses are the kind of the essence of all of Mahaprabhu's instructions, and this is what he told in brief to Srila Raghunath Das Goswami. So I'm just reading that again. He's saying, Gramya Katha na shunibe. What does that mean?
Stay far away from places where there's gossip.
Well, it just says, na shunibe, don't hear. Don't hear. Gramya Katha. That's first instruction. Don't hear it. And the second instruction is Gramya Varta na kohibe. What do you think that means? Don't speak it. So don't hear and don't speak. Jai Shri Shri Guru Gauranga Radha Govinda Jiu Ki Jai. Jai Jai Jai. Now, then he says, Balona Kaibe. What does that mean? Balo, you should know. In Bengali, when you go there, this is a word you'll hear all the time. Balo, balo. How are you today? Balo. Good. So here, balo says, balo na kaibe. Don't eat balo food. But that means luxurious food in this palatable. And then, balo na kaibe, balo na poribe. Don't wear? Yes. Then he says, Amani manada hoya. Krishna nam sada labe. Amani manada, same words that are in the Junada Pisuni Chena verse. Manadena. Amani na manadena kirtaniya sadahari. So, Amani manada hoya. Manada means to give man, to give, and it's a different man than like jealous anger, but it means to give respect, right? So, Amani, without desiring any respect, Manada, hoya, always give respect to all. And then Krishna Nam Sada Labe, always, Krishna Nam, always chant the holy names of Krishna, constantly chanting the name of Krishna. And Braje Radha Krishna Seva. What's that mean? Braje Radha Krishna Seva.
So Radha and Krishna and Braj.
Yes. And how? Manase Koribe.
By your mind.
Yes. Internal, always serving Manasi Seva. Those are the two verses. Renunciant Vaishnavas should neither hear nor speak gossip, Gramya Katha, nor should they eat palatable foods or wear fine clothes. Not expect for themselves, they should offer respect to others while constantly chanting the name of Bhagavan with prema and serving Radha Krishna within their mind. So that's the essence. Now Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is continuing on. We read this yesterday, that a sannyasi should never reside in the same village as his family members. And that we see, Archar and so forth. So that's the jumping off point. Kutichak. Then the second is Bahudak. Bahudak means that now he will go for begging nearby, not too far away, right? From others, not family members. Then comes Paribrajak Acharya. So that means now he's traveling everywhere. There's no restriction. And finally, Paramahansa. This is the topmost stage, perfectional stage. Paramahansa, Vaishnava. They have transcended material nature and they've gone very deep into the stage of bhav. But even before that, one can be called, because having the qualities of the Paramahansa, like in the stage of asakti. So, and there's different stages of Paramahansa, and there's different stages of Uttama Adhikari as well. So, a sannyasi should never reside in the same village as his family members. It is strictly prohibited for them to see men and women who are attached. So, we talked about yesterday how one thing is seeing, but another thing is with a certain intention or a certain longing or desire. That should not be there. They ought not to have any contact or conversations with women, even by mistake. So this is quite, very unique to the traditional with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, because she had some very confidential things she wanted to ask like that. And even though she was like a grandchild by age to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he would not. He said, you can speak, in the presence of the others, like that. So, because he was in the position of Acharya, and Acharya will always, Prabhu Kahe, that means Mahaprabhu said, Prabhu Kahe. It's like Sri Bhagavan Uvacha. Vairagi kore prakriti sambhashana, dekite na paro ami tahara vadana. Durvar indriya kore vishaya grahana. Daru prakriti hare muner abhiman. Kshudra jeev sab markata vairagya korya. Indriya charaya bule prakriti sambhashya. Prabhu kohe. Mor vasha nahi mor man. Prakriti sambhashi vairagi na kore darshan. So these are 4 verses extracted from that chapter 2. Oh, and now it goes on with 2 more verses from Antya-lila chapter 5. Amito sannyasi apanare virakta korimani darsha dure prakriti ra nama jadi shuni tabahi vikar pai mor tanuman prakriti darshane stir hoy konjan. All right, so now the purports. He's not translating each and every verse, but he's telling the meaning of all these verses. The purport is that sadhus who have accepted renunciation should not converse or have any other type of dealings with women. The senses are very powerful, and they always want to enjoy sense objects, one way or another. If the mind of great rishis and munis becomes restless by even looking at the form of a woman made of stone, wood, or any other material, then what is the effect of actually associating with women intimately? There is no need to discuss this. Wearing the dress of a sadhu and adopting the renunciation of a, you've heard this before, monkey renunciation. This is called Markata Vairagya. Yes. So wearing the dress of a sadhu and adopting the renunciation of a monkey, the extremely fallen living entity, being devoid of sadhana and bhajan, remains busy, speaking with women in order to satisfy his senses. Who can keep his mind steady upon seeing a woman? So we had quite a long discussion yesterday. Gopanandini Didi brought up some points, and we had quite a discussion on some of the histories of how Srila Prabhupada dealt with his female disciples and how acharyas can adjust according to time, place, circumstance. And that certainly has been done. Because in the time, even up to the time of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the standards there in India was that a sannyasi would not even ride in any vehicle. You know that? They would never ride in a vehicle. And they would not wear shoes. They would always walk barefoot, everywhere. Yeah. I mean, Mahaprabhu also walked through the forest, jungles, everywhere, like that. You know, one time, Srila Gurudev, one of the early parikramas I went on with him, he mentioned about how in this current age, this century even, of his life, from 1921 and forward, he said when he came to the Mutt, to the Gaudiya Mutt, he actually saw that the bodies of the Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta disciples were so strong in comparison with his generation.
Who said this?
Gurudev was telling to us how austerities they could do, how they could simply live on some rice. And this is due to the fact that the Kali Yuga, of course, in the last century, that became the century of absolute contamination of air, water, soil, pesticides, and you name it, and big pharma and all of that. You know, So the bodies of the human beings have become much, much, much depleted, Gurudev said. They could just have, the Prabhupada disciple. Why? Because there were no pesticides at that time. They were eating wholesome, organic food, and that was all that was available, you know. And the water, very pure, because the rivers were not contaminated by the factories and all of that. So, anyway, that's a factor to consider. The bodies are not as strong, no question about it. And and then how Srila Gurudev so mercifully interacted with his female followers and disciples. You see, he had no, in his younger years he did. He was very, very strict. Umadidi even told us. But then when he came to a certain age, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radha Govinda Ki Jai. Yeah, when he came to a certain age, then he shifted in that regard, you see. All right, so now sannyasis are not to beg alms from the houses of persons engrossed in sense enjoyment, vishayis. Oh, we talked a little bit about this in terms of begging. Srila Prabhupada even wrote in his purports, Chaitanya Charitamrita, how the world has changed and the culture. And he said how drastically different it is between India and the rest of the world in this regard, begging. And as we know, in the last century, there's so many beggars in India, and of course that's unfortunate because of the demonic leadership that has impoverished people and so forth. But nevertheless, they become victimized. And so many persons pose as sadhus by wearing the dress, but they don't follow. And this is like their occupation, you see. So that's cheating. But they're also, like I say, somewhat victimized. These people are poor and so forth. And then they adopt this method. Very hard struggle. But Prabhupada was pointing out, because did Srila Prabhupada ever go door to door begging when he came to America? No, he didn't. But what did he do? He went to shops, he went to offices, he had his books, he was placing his books here and there, contacting many, many, many people. But he wrote in Chaitanya Charitamrita that, he said in Western countries, if someone goes begging door to door, police will come and arrest him. You see, and that's a fact. So, different culture.
But he sat in the park and chanted and everybody came around.
Well, yeah, but before that happened, that there were many, many months that went by. That was not until practically the beginning of the summertime. He went all the way from when he arrived in early September, you know, I think September or late August, you know, all the way through the winter, everything, all alone. But he had a few people, you know, and when you read his New York diary, I was talking about that a few weeks ago, it's so wonderful to read that and see how Srila Prabhupada was so consciously forging ahead despite whatever disappointments were coming. He wrote letters, so many letters, and he would list that. I wrote a letter to such and such. I received a response from such and such, like this. He was trying to find persons, even in India, who were very wealthy. He even wrote to the Birlas and so forth to help. And he wanted to start in New York City. He wanted to start a big student hostel with a restaurant and like this, you know, that was what he was trying to do. But Krishna had a different plan. Nevertheless, as he continued forward, you know, then somehow or other, I mean, the conditions that he had to tolerate. I won't go into details right now because then I'll start going off in another direction. But, you know, unbelievable that he, such a exalted personality, lived in those conditions with hippies. you know. And his Bhagavad Gita manuscript was stolen, his tape recorder was stolen, you know, so many setbacks. But he continued, you know. And he just kept on giving classes and inviting people, and sometimes only one person would show up, 2 people. And then he would also, even if nobody showed up, he would do kirtan and he would tape record because somebody gave him a tape recorder. That's why we have some of those very early, beautiful, heartfelt kirtans of Prabhupada, all alone, just singing these various songs of the Acharyas. So, anyway, the main point is that sannyasis are not to beg alms from the houses of persons engrossed in sense enjoyment, vishayis, for by doing so, the consciousness becomes contaminated. And one can never perform bhajan of Sri Krishna with an impure consciousness. That is very important. It's very subtle, very subtle. Yeah? Even there's verses of accepting foodstuffs cooked by materialistic sense enjoyers. It contaminates the consciousness. So on the higher level of performing Krishna bhajan, then one becomes more and more sensitive to the effects, the subtle effects from transgressing these various rules and associating too intimately with materialistic persons. He goes on, it is improper for a renunciant Vaishnava to construct a mutt, meeting place, or any other such building, because by doing so, householder behavior will again arise within him. Yes. So when we read this, the first thing that pops into our mind is what? It's improper for a renunciant Vaishnava to construct a mutt. What happens in our mind?
Gurudev did this, Prabhupada did this.
Yeah. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he started the entire Gaudiya Math. But what did his Guru Maharaj instruct him, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur? He actually instructed him, Gorkishore Das Babaji Maharaj, instructed him, don't go to the place of Kali, meaning Kalikata, Calcutta. Don't go. But here's that special relationship between Guru and disciple, because he said that. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur obviously didn't follow that. What did he do? He went there. Was that not following the instruction? Was that disobeying his instruction? No. Because he understood the inner heart of his Guru, you see. So, such great personalities, they may even take so much risk. And they do take, not may take, they all take. And Param Gurudev, what was his standard? His standard was to go to the most busy place, right in the middle of the cities, you see. Attack Kali right at his stronghold, you see. But anyway, this is an important point. It is improper for a renunciant Vaishnava to construct a mutt, meeting place, or any other such building, because by doing so, householder behavior will again arise within him. What does that mean, householder behavior? In this connection, he's built a mutt, meeting place, whatever, and householder behavior will again arise within him.
So the desire to have family and comfort.
Yes.
To be concerned with money and upkeep of a group of people in a place.
Also, this is my room. And actually this happened. It's very famous. well-known statement by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur concerning his Calcutta mutt, which was beautifully constructed. What's the name of it again? Bagh Bazar. Bagh Bazar Gaudiya Mutt. It's still there. I've never gone there, but it's still there. And at that time, when it was constructed, it was a very beautiful building, you know, very well constructed and so forth. Big donation was given by one very, very wealthy but extremely surrendered disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada. Very elderly, and he died just after that construction. Vigyan Bharati Maharaj talks about that personality. So, but then, what started to happen, Prabhupada was not happy when he saw that now, because this was toward the very end of his preaching, maybe the last 3 years or so, and now they had this palatial headquarters in Calcutta, and so many persons were coming there. But he noticed that sometimes the sannyasis or the brahmacharis, they were quarreling over who's going to have which room, because they made so many rooms, right? And then he made a comment, because, you know, the altar was made of marble and so forth. And he said, better to sell this marble from the altar, and print books. So he was showing how he was not approving of the mentality that was developing, as opposed to earlier in his preaching mission, when everybody was very detached and renounced. So, and we've seen that in ISKCON. Oh my God, did I see that in ISKCON? Ho, ho, ho. And Srila Sridhar, Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, he made so many comments in his book, Sri Guru and His Grace, about how one may see this gradual decline in a guru, who in the beginning, he was following the instructions of his Guru Maharaj, properly conveying them, but in course of time, like the waning of the moon, day by day, the moon is waning at that time of the month. And then he said, one will gradually see that the advices and the instructions of his guru become absent in him. And then the desire begins to manifest. The three things, Labh, Puja, Pratishta, or Kanaka, Kamini, and Pratishta. Kanaka means wealth, Labh, material gain. Puja, so many followers. Labh, Puja, Pratishta, we don't even have to, that word is well known by us. Kanaka, Kamini. Kamini and Puja. It means, Kamini means feminine gender, but it also means the desire for material comforts and material gain and having so many followers and people adoring you. So Srila Sridhar Maharaj pointed this out. It's very interesting to read that. There's a few very essential chapters in that book. And we saw it happen again and again and again and again, where sannyasis, even they became gurus, accepting disciples and so forth. And then these three things began to manifest in them. And we saw that they became, in ISKCON, it was almost like a status symbol, that if you're one of the zonal gurus, you remember all this, that, you know, you're wearing fine silks, right? Gold rings. Because Prabhupada sometimes wore rings that people gave him, right? But that's like Lord Nityananda, who wore, you know, because he was preaching to the goldsmiths, and they became so attached to Nitai that they wanted to always decorate him with beautiful colored turbans and all, and he wore that. But he's an avadut, you know. So somebody tries to imitate that, they'll fall down. But this is what they were doing. Fine silks, gold chains, gold Rolex watch.
Special cooks.
Special cooks and feasting every day. Now, were they following the instructions that Mahaprabhu gave to Raghunath Das Goswami? Absolutely not. And I thought it was quite odd that this was going on, especially our dear friend begins with the letter B. Because when I saw what was going on there, I was thinking, what a minute. Prabhupada never did this, you know? And this is not the standard of sannyasis to live like that, you know? And then what started to happen? Such big, puffed up, false ego. And I could go on. All of us Prabhupada disciples who lived through that, we could tell many, many stories. You know, but the thing is, these are deviations. And they were not protecting. They're not being protected because actually they were quite neophyte devotees, although they had done very laudable service for their gurus while Prabhupada was on the planet. They did very good service. But this was a particular time period when they now needed higher guidance to hear. Srila Gurudev said a critical point will come that one does not yet have enough attraction for the higher stages of Krishna consciousness, bhakti. But he's left the lower things, left that, you know. But he has not yet developed enough attraction. And there's a critical stage, he said, that if someone doesn't have the opportunity to hear from higher realized Vaishnavas and associate with them, then he may fall backwards because of the anarthas are still there, you see, and also offenses committed. So in this way, it's very essential. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is pointing out how one must be careful in these stages. So, although he's saying here that it's improper for a renunciant Vaishnava to construct a mat, but for the Paramahansa Vaishnavas, they can do. No problem. So, it is desirable for him to be absorbed in remembering Krishna while worshipping a Govardhan Shila. Now he's giving this positive instruction. Very desirable for a sannyasi to be absorbed in remembering Krishna while worshipping a Govardhan Shila and so forth in a simple manner. He's comparing that to constructing a mat and everything. So now he quotes two verses from Mahaprabhu in Chaitanya Charitamrita Anjalila chapter 6. I think this is where he gave a Govardhan Shila to Raghunath Das Goswami. And he's instructing how to worship. He says, Eka kunja jal ar tulsi manjari satvika seva shuddha bhave kori dui dike dui patra madhye komala manjari matta ashta manjari dibe shraddha kori. I've heard Gurudev repeating this many times. In these two verses, he's saying, for such worship of Govardhan Shila, a jug of water and the soft blossom of the tulsi plant is needed. When performed with heart, this service is in the mode of goodness. Here he says, Satvika Seva, a Shuddha Bhave Kori, Shuddha Bhave. Very purified mood of heart. Then he says, Dui Dike, Dui Patra. So in two directions, you have two leaves of tulsi. The blossoms, meaning the tulsi manjari, Komala manjari, should be soft. And the blossom should have leaves on each side of the flower. And in this way, you should offer 8 blossoms, 8 manjaris. And he says, Dive Shraddha Kori, with great faith. So this, such very simple, but very deep bhavs and moods in this. In special situations, devotees can accept sannyas in accordance with the regulations prescribed for varnashram dharma. So this is called Vaidha sannyas, like in the regular varnashram dharma. So in special situations, he's saying. And he says there is no rule that everyone must follow this system of accepting Vaidha sannyas. At the time of retiring from household life, Vaishnavas born in a Brahmin family, they can accept Vaidha sannyas according to their ashram, but not that portion that is unfavorable for bhakti. So in that Vaidha sannyas, sometimes called karma sannyas, there are so many different activities that are not in conjunction with bhakti. So they're not so favorable for bhakti. And now, Vaishnava sannyasis must not accept the dress of Mayavadis and must always avoid bad association. They are not to use oil or any objects used in luxurious living. And they should remain far from the singing and the dancing of women. Oh, I could make so many comments here. You know, I remember, I was telling the story yesterday, you missed my story about the first time I went to India in 1975 on the chartered flight. And that was the biggest festival up to that point with Prabhupada in Mayapur. And, you know, I was talking about how exciting it was and how we came all this way, 30-hour flight on one plane, and we arrived finally in Mayapur, and there was so much prasadam being given from the devotees there. And we were there with Prabhupada about 2 weeks. And so Prabhupada was coming in morning and evening. And one evening, which was something none of us had ever seen up to that point, the Manipuri dance troupe, they came, actually Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj, that's the first time that he brought them, you know, and he brought them from Manipur. Have you ever seen them? Yeah. Or pictures or anything? Yeah.
I've seen them perform, yeah.
I've seen also a couple times, you know. And yeah, most of them were ladies. I think maybe even all of them in that particular troupe, but one of them was dressed as Krishna and was dancing. And so, you know, there was like a few hundred saffron-clad young brahmacharis who were sitting there. You know, we were all like early 20s, mid-20s, like that. And Srila Prabhupada was sitting, they made a special Vyasasan, and he was also watching it. And it was some Krishna Lila pastime, you know. But Prabhupada understood the mind of his young male disciples in particular. And he made some comment at the end of that saying about how he appreciates so much. They've come, they're very genuine, this is the genuine culture, you know, of Vedic culture, the dancing and singing, depicting Krishna Lila and so forth. And then he said something, I don't remember exactly how, he can probably look it up on his lectures, transcriptions of his lectures. And then he said something about how, but actually for young men, brahmacharis, it is not so good to watch young ladies dancing like that, you see. So, but now in our Krishna consciousness movement, we're seeing, like, look at Malini, she's always dancing, and so many others, and it's a very wonderful thing, you see. So, but the main thing is that here's another rule and regulation, that a Vaishnava sannyasi, they should remain far from the singing and dancing of women. So then the next section, which I guess we're going to have Artik very soon, but the singing of women and Mahaprabhu's ideal about that. So I'm just going to read this. One day, Sriman Mahaprabhu was heading to Yameshwar garden in Puri. Yameshwar, we actually went there with Gurudev, the very same place. It's a temple of Lord Shiva, which is a little bit subterranean actually. We couldn't go down the stairs into that place because we have Western bodies. So we had to wait. And this is actually transcribed, Gurudev's lecture. I think it was in that Jagannath Puri book, Gurudev's.
Origins of Advaita?
Yeah, that one. Right. And yeah, he came up and after that he gave us a very nice lecture for the Westerners saying that actually you're more fortunate than the ones that are going to take the darshan like that. So that very same place is not far from Tota Gopinath, the famous Tota Gopinath temple, where Gadadhar Pandit worshipped Tota Gopinath. And when Mahaprabhu was going in that direction to that garden, Yameshwar, so some distance from the road, a local village girl was sweetly singing a beautiful verse from the divine poem Gita Govinda by Sri Jayadev, who was the renowned poet, bard. The verse contained a charming and sweet description of Sri Krishna's form, and the girl's voice was like the singing of a cuckoo bird. Mahaprabhu became agitated in praying upon hearing that song, and completely oblivious to whether it was sung by a man or woman. Oh, he was oblivious to that. Intoxicated by transcendental bhavs, he anxiously ran to embrace the person who was pouring nectar into his ears. With great eagerness, he ran straight towards the source of the sound, paying no attention to the path. Thorny bushes cut his entire body till it bled, and thorns pierced his feet, but still he continued running. And seeing this, Govinda, his servant, ran closely behind him. And before Mahaprabhu reached the Devadasi, Govinda caught hold of him and said, "Prabhu, it is a woman singing. Where are you going?" And upon hearing the word woman, Mahaprabhu came to his external consciousness. Then he returned from that place, and in a voice trembling with gratitude, he said, "Govinda, today you have saved me. If I had touched that woman, even out of forgetfulness, my life air would certainly have left this body. I am eternally indebted to you for this favor." So, the conclusion is that renunciant Vaishnavas should remain far from intimately associating with women. This is the story of Mahaprabhu himself. So Mahaprabhu showed such very high standards. He had to do that. He had to. And our acharyas have also tried. But as Kali Yuga has progressed, we have seen that such disappointment Srila Prabhupada had to undergo. But he knew that. You know that? I'll tell one quick story. Prabhupada knew. Because in 1976, 1 year before Prabhupada departed, he went to Hawaii and he was going to stay there in the Honolulu temple that they had there for about a month or so. He was staying there. And at that time, quite a few of the ISKCON leaders came there to be with Prabhupada during that time. And one day, because some of those ISKCON leaders, they either had left their sannyas or they were almost about to, you see, and some had already done previously. But they were all congregated in Prabhupada's room in that temple. And I can tell you that I went there personally for the very first time. I went to Hawaii, which was just after taking sannyas in 2002. and Gurudev was going to have a festival there. And my godbrother, who had taken sannyas with me, I can't believe how my mind just goes blank on names. Drishtadumna, yes, Drishtadumna. Of course, it's been many, many years since he's been, so name hasn't come. He had taken sannyas from Srila Prabhupada in 1976, that very same year. But then, in 2002, after he had come to be with Gurudev, Gurudev reinstated his sannyas. And it was both of us who had taken sannyas together in Navadvipdhan from Gurudev. So then after that, Gurudev was going to go to Hawaii. He first of all went down to Australia, New Zealand, then he came to Hawaii. And that was my first time coming. Now, Dristadumna, who got the name Bhakti Sar, you remember, right? Yes. So he had lived in Hawaii for more than 10 years on that same island, right? And now we're coming as sannyasis to be with Gurudev, right? And so we went in the morning after arriving the day before. Then we went in the morning to visit the ISKCON temple, which I had never seen, but it had already been there since the 70s, you know. A very beautiful location in Honolulu, big land around it, huge, gigantic banyan tree, very, very nice setting there. And we went into Srila Prabhupada's room. And he was showing me, here's the room. I was here with Prabhupada in 1976. And he began to tell me the story of that room conversation that Prabhupada had with the ISKCON leaders there. So in the course of that conversation, and mind you, Dristadumna had just taken sannyas a few months before, at the age of 26. And so then Srila Prabhupada, in the course of the discussion that he was having with the senior devotees there, he was addressing this problem of their not being able to properly keep their sannyas and so forth. And then Prabhupada said, he says, actually, none of you are qualified for sannyas. He says, what I have done is a battlefield commission. You know what that is?
Emergency.
Yeah, you were in the service. What is a battlefield commission? Okay, do you know?
I mean, I can make a guess, but
What's your guess?
that in time of war you can quickly appoint generals who might not otherwise.
Exactly.
Who might not otherwise.
Yeah,
be
or
qualified
any
officers.
higher position.
Yeah.
If that soldier gets shot down in the course of the battle, you know, that's called a battlefield commission. When suddenly you know that some officer will say, okay, now you're in this rank, and you're immediately appointed to that rank, and you have to start to function in that way. Does that sound? You ever heard something like that?
I wasn't in wartime.
Okay. So Prabhupada was saying, actually none of you are qualified, but what I have done is given a battlefield commission, right? So then, he said, and actually most of you will probably fall down. And Dristadumna said, at that point it was like, you know, he was 26, he had just taken sannyas, and now he's hearing this from Prabhupada. It was like, you know, like a dagger in his heart. But after Prabhupada said that, most of you will probably fall down, then he said, but it will be a glorious death. Because we see that even in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is saying, no, Krishna is saying to Arjuna, happy are the Kshatriyas, for whom such fighting opportunities come unsought, opening for them the doors of the heavenly planets. You see? So Kshatriyas are very happy to die on the battlefield because they immediately become promoted very high position. You see? Now, so what Prabhupada was saying is it will be a glorious death. And why? Because these particular individuals who were encouraged by Srila Prabhupada to take sannyas, they were young. And Prabhupada knew that there's every possibility that they may fall. But he had to do this. This was a very great sacrifice. These particular jivas were being sacrificed on the altar by the pure devotee for Lord Chaitanya's preaching mission, you see. And I've even heard Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj talk about this in the same kind of vein, that time period that they were functioning as sannyasis, trying their best, right? However long it lasted. He said they were making more spiritual advancement than in a number of lifetimes, you see, because of the full sacrifice. So, Srila Prabhupada and Gurudev used to refer to this, how the long list of disciples of Prabhupada who took sannyas while Prabhupada was present, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's very, very high. Probably like upper 80% of those who still remained. Most fell down, you see. So the point and why I'm bringing this up is that time, place, and circumstance again. Kala, Desha, and Patra, the pure devotees. So even Gurudev, and Gurudev used to say, he told it to me, he told it, that, oh, Swamiji, you know, he did not give real sannyas, but I will give real sannyas. What did he mean by that? Because even Drishtadyumna admitted to us that Prabhupada did not give him the mantra. He was only given on a piece of paper. He did not speak it to him. So what Prabhupada was doing, we can understand. That it was a massive revolutionary army that he was putting together. And he needed leaders. You cannot have an army without leaders. So what devotees amongst his disciples that he saw that had the makings, who might be able to perform that function, and he could see that they had made some spiritual advancement, certainly not enough, but enough to make this attempt under the guidance of the pure devotee. And they did have the opportunity to continue in that way, you see. So that's the thing, that Srila Prabhupada knew this, you see. He already knew that they probably will not be able to continue. But yet he was giving so much mercy and blessings to those individuals that even despite if they would fall, he was covering. He was covering for them, you know. And when Gurudev had the opportunity to reinstate Drishtadyumna, he was so happy, Gurudev was. Because Prabhupada asked him, you know, to help his disciples after he leaves. And this was a very special thing. And I know that Gurudev, he even said this in San Francisco one time, when we were on a small morning walk, not too many devotees had come yet. It was at like some Marriott Inn, like these houses they rented, Radhakanta rented. And we were on the morning walk, maybe 5 devotees only, and Nemi Maharaj was there and he had a camera, video camera. And it was mentioned to Gurudev how, I think Nemi Maharaj said, Gurudev, we see that when you, this is the last thing I'll say. We see that when you meet any Prabhupada disciple, you seem to have such a strong desire and mood to help them, you know. Not only Prabhupada disciple, but also very senior devotees who also came just after Prabhupada. Yeah, and then Gurudev smiled and he said, yes, because Swamiji requested me to help his disciples, you know. So I have special mood, specifically like that. All right, so we're gradually getting through the section of the renunciant Vaishnavas, and there's only one more section that we'll read tomorrow, and then he gets into a section of the necessity for both householders and renunciants to accept initiation into Krishna Nam and Krishna Mantra, and the necessity of accepting a guru. And then from then on until the end of the chapter, it's not only speaking about the renunciants. So, Hare Krishna. Gaur Premanande, Shri Upadesham Ritam Ki Jai, Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur Ki Jai, Srila Rupa Goswami Pada Ki Jai, Nitai Gaur Premanande, Vancha Kalpatarubhascha, Kripa Sindhu Beva Cha Patitanam Bhavani Bhyo Vaishnavi Namo.